quite the same thing. Have you kind of run into that with the study groups or any other groups that you've worked with?
A lot of the stuff, the groups that we've been working with and trying to make sense as to sort of how people use transformative justice, I think largely get the idea that it's got to move beyond the Western conception, at the very least, of restorative justice, and begin to really situate this back in communities. And so, restorative justice, the way we do it in the UK, is all about you've got the victim, you've got the perpetrator. We're dealing with that and not looking at those broader conditions. So we're stripping out all of that indigenous praxis and knowledge that's emerged through Braithwaite and all the other work since. I've actually got a colleague at Nottingham Trent who looks at his work is largely focused around customary justice practices in Fiji, for example, and sort of through things like the yellow ribbon programs. That again, similar sort of idea. Let's get these people back in. Let's celebrate the fact that they're part of the community. But hang on, the practices they've got there are about celebrating the person literally as they come back into a big party, which then you've got the balancing act between the victim's needs and that integrative process. Transformative justice hasn't taken grip in quite the same way in the UK. I don't think there is a lot of work going on, but it's still very much focused on almost that internationalization agenda and the international, what's the word I'm looking for? International relations side of things. Um, Northern Ireland, and the conflict there, sectarian violence is arguably the most prominent geographically local situation that we can see. And even there, we're seeing some really interesting work emerging around sort of the use of legal reforms, housing reforms to break down some of the sectarian communities there and integrate people. I'm interested to keep an eye on a couple of other projects around the area as well. So, got a meeting with a couple of colleagues working at HMP Holloway, which is what used to be the UK's largest women's prison until it closed down in about 2000. I want to say 2004. It might have been more recently. And they've done some amazing visual arts work there, trying to make sense of sort of what that space meant to the women who were there, and then now turn that into a women's hub and a women's centre for support, so that they can again repurpose the justice apparatus and reimagine what we can do. It's quite a symbolic site to be able to do that with as well. So I'm hoping that we won't sort of have that, oh, it's just restorative justice by any other name, and that we'll be able to keep track of the community side of it. Poverty Truth Commissions have that praxis, that local activism, and that statement coming through from the start. So I'm quietly hopeful, but I'm not going to cross everything, because knowing me, I'll break a finger or something.
Yeah, right on. Well, thank you so much for presenting. Jolly good stuff, as you say, on the other side of the pond. I hope to hear more good work that you do. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Lucas, and thanks everyone for sticking around as well.
Bye. All right. Next person we have on this awesome conference is Jess Bob, discussing critical disability theory, schizophrenia, and transformative justice. Bob graduated in 2020 from Minnesota State Community and Technical College with her associates in legal assisting, with a focus on disability law and advocacy. She has been in the psychiatric system since age 8 and uses her experience with serious mental illness to propel others forward. She is currently happily employed at NIAM LLP in Fargo, North Dakota, where she is a peer support specialist. She hopes to return to school for a social work degree. In her free time, she enjoys judging speech and debate, reading a variety of crafts, and being a bunny mom. Bob has been a Mad Pride activist all life. Jess, you have the floor.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. This is my very first conference, so bear with me if something wonky happens. All right. Crap. Trying to figure out how to share my PowerPoint.
Oh, there's a green button, share screen.
Yep. Chrome tab. That's the one I want. Oops. Sorry, guys. Maybe I'll just start talking. Do you guys see slides?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. For some reason, I don't see slides. Alrighty, so I'm going to start off visiting with you guys with a personal story. If you want the full version of the story, check out this zine. Thank you, Luke. So my story today starts back in 2009. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder 2 weeks after I turned 20. And in 2011, my local psychiatric hospital had gotten sick of my taking up residence there and suggested that I perhaps should go to the state hospital. Because of my serious mental illness and the fact that I was floridly psychotic, I really didn't fight this presentation or this offer. And I had prepared to go to the state hospital. Unfortunately, they did not tell me that the people that were taking me to the state hospital were going to put me in handcuffs and throw me in the back of a police car. So, understandably, lady with active psychosis, really not very excited to get in the back of this police car. And then ended up at the state hospital. And after a few days, I had a psychiatrist who had the guts to tell me that he did not believe what I was saying and thought that I was there wasting his time. So, of course, I said, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I can go home, right? And he said no and kind of went on to berate me. So I hit him, which bought me 24 hours in seclusion. Seclusion at the state hospital in July really sucks. There's no ventilation, there's no air, you're just stuck in a cell. Bed on the floor, jail-style toilet, it's a cell. And I had the privilege to spend 24 hours there. And that was not really my first experience or last experience with what I felt was misguided justice in the mental health system, but definitely the experience that stuck out most for me. So today I'm going to be talking about schizophrenia and how it relates to critical disability theory, sharing some must reads at the end. I will get started here then. All right. Let's start out with some definitions because I was a debater and that's what you do. All right. So the National Institute of Health gave us both of these definitions. So critical disability theory, according to the National Institute of Health, is both a lived reality in which the experience of people with disabilities are central to interpreting their place in the world and is a social and political definition based on societal power relations. Goes on to define schizophrenia as a mental disorder characterized by disruptions in thought processes, perceptions, emotional responsiveness, and social interactions. There they are. Okay, great. All right. So, social relevance, or why should I care? When I was on the speech team at NDSU, our coach always asked us, what's the big so what? So here's the big so what about schizophrenia and its involvement with transformative justice and critical disability theory. The World Health Organization considers schizophrenia as one of the 10 most disabling conditions worldwide. An estimated 1% of people in the world live with schizophrenia. Most people with schizophrenia are no more violent than those in the general population. Unfortunately, there's no cure for schizophrenia, however, it can be managed. With support and medication, people with schizophrenia are able to live happy and productive lives. And you probably know someone with schizophrenia. All right, so let's talk about positive and negative symptoms a bit. This doesn't mean like good and bad. their presence or absence of. So positive symptoms are going to be delusions, hallucinations, disorganized behavior patterns. This is going to be your seeing things, hearing voices, sensations of bugs. I knew somebody once that would hallucinate the smell of pumpkin pie. I was kind of jealous because I just had these mean voices and they had pumpkin pie. Negative symptoms are going to be things like lack of motivation, flat affect, sleep patterns change. These are the things that, I'll talk about this in a little bit too, but these are the things that onset earlier than the delusions and the other positive symptoms. So there's 3 different stages of schizophrenia. Prodromal is the beginning part. Their symptoms include things like lack of motivation, social withdrawal, difficulty concentrating. Because these can look like other diagnoses, schizophrenia is rarely diagnosed at the prodromal point. It's the active point when the symptoms, the psychosis that we commonly think of with schizophrenia starts showing up, the voices. For me, I had a Nazi living in the corner of my bedroom, that kind of stuff. So as soon as you get help, the better your prognosis is, just like any other health concern. And then there's the residual stage, which I'm in, and I call it schizophrenia in remission. You might still have some mild symptoms occasionally. Sometimes the negative symptoms will still be there. Like I have some cognitive issues that came along with schizophrenia. So I still deal with those even though I'm not actively psychotic anymore. All right. Okay. So balance of power, because, hey, transformative justice, right? So somehow those of us with serious mental illness end up on the receiving end of unpleasant treatment are tragically misunderstood. I know that sounds kind of hyperbolic, but bear with me. While historical maltreatments like lobotomy, forced sterilization, and insulin shock treatments no longer exist, it is still legal to force treatment on someone. This can happen when the courts and/or family determine that the person is unable to care for themselves. Another maltreatment that can occur is through religious trauma, when clergy try to convince the person with schizophrenia that they are possessed and needed an exorcism. So that's actually happened to me when I was first diagnosed. My family, meaning well, I'm sure, tried to get my then boyfriend's folks on board to have an exorcism because they were convinced that I had some kind of demon. No demon, just schizophrenia. All right. Schizophrenia and incarceration. I fortunately have been able to not ever go to jail. I think I'd last about 20 minutes in jail. But people with schizophrenia are often incarcerated unnecessarily, typically for an infraction that occurred while they were actively psychotic or just because someone found them to be annoying. Like, I know somebody who was arrested because they had a manic episode and they were running around downtown screaming. As you guys, I'm sure, are quite aware, American jails have basically just become mental institutions, with the Department of Justice saying that approximately half of those in jail have a mental illness. So you guys are aware in the 50s, 60s, 70s, deinstitutionalization happened, cleaned out all those big state hospitals. Unfortunately, what's happened is it's become transinstitutionalization, where the people that could benefit from those hospitals are now ending up in jail or prison where they're not getting the treatment they need. All right, so here's a little bit, whoops, went too far. Okay, so I guess we're gonna have to skip that one. No. Sorry, guys. Okay, we're back. All right, so this is not my research. It's just something that I found that I thought was really interesting and would be applicable. From handcuffs to hallucinations, from the National Library of Medicine. So the most common categories of crime amongst people with schizophrenia are DUI and drug-related thefts and assault or fighting. People with schizophrenia are most likely to be incarcerated are generally male, African American, poor with a lower education level. They have a history of incarceration and problems on Access 4. Access 4 is like housing, education, finances, that kind of stuff. And they're more, yeah, we'll skip that one. All right. So next thing I'm going to talk about is pharmaceuticals. So there's typical antipsychotics and atypical antipsychotics. One works on dopamine, the other works on serotonin. They have some nasty side effects. Weight gain, my least favorite. Sleepiness, drooling, dry mouth, constipation, possible tardive dyskinesia. There's options with pharmaceuticals, pills, sublingual. You'll see depot on there. Basically what depot is, it's a long-acting injection of an antipsychotic, and it usually lasts 3 to 4 weeks. It's great for people who really suck at remembering to take their pills. All right, this is something I wish was around when I was diagnosed in 2009. It's a first episode psychosis or navigate program. Basically, they reach out to young people who have been having their first foray into psychosis. And they offer therapy, peer-to-peer work, group workshops, supported employment, family therapy, and case management, basically hoping to mitigate some of the more devastating effects of schizophrenia before they happen, because like anything else, the sooner you catch it, the better the prognosis is. All right, schizophrenia and peer support. I work in peer support, actually. So I'm really quite fond of the peer support movement. So peer supports help people with schizophrenia collaborate with others who have had similar lived experiences. Things that peer support can assist with are things like dealing with symptoms that are often difficult and upsetting to experience, addressing challenges of living with schizophrenia, working through stigma and public opinion, decreasing social isolation, applying for public assistance and benefits to make life a bit easier, and obtaining and maintaining employment and benefits. Things I wish the doctors told you. This is something I've been writing over the last month or so. This is just a quick blurb. There's the writing goes on for pages. It's just a taste of it. You will gain weight with the antipsychotics. A lot of weight, very fast. You will not be happy about this. You will have difficulties with memory and executive functioning. People will be super supportive when you're first in the hospital, but as it becomes clear that your illness is chronic, support will wane. People probably don't want to talk about your illness with you. And don't stop taking your meds if you start feeling better, because antipsychotics are not a course of antibiotics. And then here's recommended reading. I have read all these books. Highly recommend. One of the funny things here you'll notice is the Christmas I was diagnosed, I gave my parents the book Schizophrenia for Dummies. To his credit, my dad read it. I also have the Willard Suitcase Project on here. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that or not. But basically what happened was Willard State Hospital closed, and I believe it was 1996. And they were going to demolish some buildings, and these ladies that had worked at Willard for many, many years were like, oh, there's this building that has all these suitcases and stuff. So they had some photographers come and take pictures, and it turned into a blog on Slate. And then they actually wrote a book where they picked 10 of the suitcase owners and went through their records and stuff, and were able to kind of piece together their stories. Fantastic book. The Collected Schizophrenias, I read that last year. It's thick. It's a big book. But it addresses not just schizophrenia, but schizoaffective, schizotypal, schizophreniform, all of the psychotic disorders. Alan Sachs is like my hero. Before I ended up with schizophrenia, I was on the fast track to law school. Ellen Sachs was a Yale law student when she got schizophrenia. And they basically told her that she was going to spend her life in an institution. This was the 70s. And she's like, screw that. No, I'm not going to. So she got her law degree. She now is a law professor and wrote an opera about her experience. Divided Minds is really interesting. It's written by identical twin sisters. Pam of the pair of sisters had schizophrenia, and she had oh geez, let's start with C. She had like a movement disorder. I can't think of the word right now. That went along with her schizophrenia. E. Fuller Torrey has a lot of other books about mental illness that are really interesting that I've read as well. So I think, woo. All right, and then here's my my biography. If you guys are interested in checking out any of the things that I used. All right. Okay. I guess that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Like, if anyone has any questions or comments, put them in the chat. Can you talk a little bit about your work with Niami, and any carceral effects that they have, or anything, or any work that they try to stop incarcerating people because of mental illness?
That's a good question, Luke. I do have so here where I work, we have a program called Free Through Recovery, and that funds free services for people that were incarcerated and are trying to get their lives back together. So I do work with a few of those folks. Trying to think if there's anything other than that. That'd be fun to tell you.
So I've been diagnosed with schizotypal. I don't really tell people that because they don't know what the hell it is, and it sounds horrifying. So I don't know. I mean, I am embarrassed with it, but that doesn't like define me. I have enough labels as it is to have another thing. But what would you say to someone like, like, I know there's like, because you're part of like the Mad Pride movement, and that's a way of like recapturing one's like self-agency and everything when it comes to their madness. Would you like to talk about that to like people that are kind of like, well, should I say that or should I not, or whatever?
So yeah, like you said at the beginning of the presentation, I've been in the mental health system since I was a little kid, and it has just always been part of me. And I've been like, yeah, I've got schizophrenia, I'll tell anybody, which is kind of not the right approach. Sometimes it kind of scares people. But I feel like owning it makes it a little less scary.
How would you want to go in further and kind of, because I know that if you say to someone, well, I have this, it might like, I don't know, like reinforce that you can just do whatever you want or something. I don't know, like it's everyone I know, like I'm guilty of it. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, that's cray cray, and like I think that's just some hidden hidden oppression that I have to try to get rid of. Other people say, they'll say that's lame or everything. And these are like kind of language discussions that we've been having all day, and we have another one next that will discuss language and everything. So how do you deal with that, or what are
Really
ways that
bothers
people
me
can
when
advocate?
it really bothers me when people use schizophrenic as a pejorative. I hate that. Please don't describe things as schizophrenic. There are much better alternatives out there.
Sure. Are there any other ones that you know of?
Like as
any
far
other
as,
pejoratives? Yeah.
I mean, there's always retarded. Nobody ever wants to say that.
Yeah.
One that I hear a lot that kind of bothers me, even though I don't suffer from it, is using borderline as a pejorative. You said I don't have borderline, but I know people and love people that do. And it's, yeah, that's not appropriate to use that term in a negative manner.
And so you have just a few minutes. Is there anything else you want to discuss or let folks know?
I don't know.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, we got a question.
Okay.
Hi, Jessica. First, I want to thank you for your presentation. I love that you're able to intertwine humor into all of this. And so I turned on my camera so you could see me laughing, hopefully,
Awesome.
to some of the things yeah. And so I wonder if one of the concerns I have with mental health in the incarcerated population is that obviously they're not receiving proper diagnoses. So people
Definitely.
would rather diagnose them with something that has a medication that's easy to just medicate rather than give them a true, assessment, right? And so, like, I'm married to a formerly incarcerated man who has dissociative identity disorder, but he was diagnosed as having schizophrenia in prison and medicated for years for a condition he didn't even have, because DID is a little more difficult to diagnose.
Right.
It takes a lot more talk therapy and things. And so I'm wondering if you see that in your work, if you have suggestions. I mean, obviously I would love to have well-funded mental health, right? But like, do you see that in your work with people who are formerly incarcerated or are misdiagnosed
Yes.
while they're in the correctional system?
Yes. Unfortunately, we do. Yeah, it's hard to know what to do in those situations. Fortunately, we do work with a psychiatrist who's really understanding, and we try to, because I have a few people who are incarcerated at the moment, and we try to work with the jail to understand a little bit more about what's going on with that person. I have someone in jail right now who is in active psychosis, and the jail is not medicating this person. And I'm rather upset about it because, like, when one of my coworkers goes to visit them, they're obviously psychotic, and the jail is doing nothing about it. And we're trying to figure out if there's something on our end that we can do. I could tell you guys my favorite joke if you want. It's about engineers.
Yeah.
Luke's like, whatever. Yeah. So 3 engineers are sitting at the bar discussing God. Mechanical engineer says, God is a mechanical engineer. Look how all those bones and joints function. Second guy says, no, God is an electrical engineer. Look at how all those synapses fire. Third guy laughs and says, God is a civil engineer, because who else would run a toxic waste pipeline through a recreational area?
Wow. I'll remember that. Whenever I go to an engineer conference, which would be never. So thank you so much, Jessica,
Yep.
for
You're welcome.
your awesome knowledge and everything. So thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for this awesome conference. Next speaker is Kyle Robinson. Rehumanizing begins with your language. Robinson is a member of Village Second Chances, a community building space made up of advocates and family of incarcerated individuals, where they learn, heal, and support each other while also championing second look legislation. Yep. Yep. I gotta see if I gotta. Yeah, can't hear you. Should I do the other? I don't know if you have two. Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Got some. Yep.
All right, how is that, Lucas? Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
You can?
Yep.
I can't hear you. I guess I won't totally need to. There we go. I got my volume up. And how is this? This sound, you can hear me?
That's perfect. Yep.
All right. As you just pointed out, I know what everyone's looking forward to. One more conversation about language. I don't think I could cover any better than it's been covered today. I especially appreciated Dr. Garlock's presentation and the dialogue that y'all had at the end. So I'm going to try not to bore you, but prepare to be underwhelmed. If anyone wants to come off of screen, off of your non-camera status, I welcome you to now, so that it doesn't distract anyone later. And yeah, I like to see faces. So for anyone who's into that, I invite you to. What I was going to try to push on you today, what I was going to try to convince everyone, was that when we use the word crime or criminal, when we use the word criminal, what we're actually covering up, what we're not saying, is words like survivor of domestic abuse, children, neurodivergent, those with mental health neglect, the innocent. There's a lot of people who make up that somewhat dismissive term, criminal. And that's what I wanted to push on you today. Since I've got quite a bit of time left, I wanted to talk about a specific piece of language or a term that you've probably never heard before, but I imagine you'll probably be hearing it. I hope you'll be hearing it and saying it a lot more. The term incarceracism. Incarceracism. Take a moment. Incarceracism, to give you, I'll give you the proper definition in just a moment, but the idea, the point you need to know is that this is a unifying term that we should all be able to get behind. Now, I imagine, I haven't shared this in many public spaces yet, so I imagine that this could draw the response, well, Kyle, do we really need another word? Did you have to use? Yes. When you first hear that term, you may have an idea of something may come to mind. It works in a lot of ways. The reason that I initially came up with the term, I'm sure it's been in other people's minds before. The reason I came up with the term is because of something I've heard in almost every presentation to date. And in almost every conversation that I experience when I'm trying to talk about this legal system that we have, I tend to experience it as well. It's a very subtle set of beliefs. It's a family of beliefs about people who are incarcerated, especially people of color. That's the way that you want to think of it. It's a philosophy. What it is not is synonymous with racism. I should say it's not identical to racism. And the easiest way to explain it to someone, simplest shortcut, is the way that our country, speaking from an American location, the way that our country has always felt about people of color, approached people of color, mistreated people of color, has now expanded or shifted to extend to our entire incarcerated population. There's a lot of key players in this scenario. And I'm sure that in front of this crowd, I don't have to go by and name them all. I think some of y'all have spoken about the abuses quite well in the departments that they come from. But this philosophy, an important thing to remember about this philosophy is that it affects people of every color, and it is embraced by people of every color, such that we're obviously very apathetic, as I'm sure y'all know, to the real life suffering that a lot of people are going through right now. There's not a, you can't imagine a crime that was happening on plantations that we've not mentioned today that still happens in our prisons. And I think that says a lot. I think that says a lot. But I think I'd rather try to give you a story, or I'd like to add a story to kind of help you understand how it feels. I came into advocacy work about going on 3 years ago. This was roughly 15 years after I was released from prison. I'm someone who was charged as an adult, went through that system, and can testify to everything that you've heard here today, but as well as the uniformity of it between different jurisdictions. If you'd have told me when I got out that I was going to end up in the story I'm going to tell you today, it wouldn't make any sense to me. But here's what happened. I come into advocacy work because I hear of this innocent guy telling his story at our community, at a community building forum, and become an advocate of his, go through the system with him, and end up meeting a woman, who was named Tamara Washington. She's an innocent woman in the Michigan Department of Corrections. And hear me when I say this, she has the most ridiculous, corrupt case I've ever ran into. I got like about 250 people in my JPay, so that's saying something. Her case is one of actual innocence. She's sentenced to 32 to 50 years, has served 12 of them, going on 13. And what makes her case so bonkers is that she's charged with an armed robbery, and there's a principal, meaning she's the accessory. There's the principal, the person who actually is accused of committing the direct act of robbery. Well, this person who's accused of committing the direct act of robbery, they were in jail on the date of the pretrial. So what the prosecutor and the court do, and this happens, we haven't said it directly, but now we have a term for it. So I'll be using it. This is how incarceral racism happens. Well, because they've got this guy who's obviously you can't prosecute. I mean, being in jail is a hell of an alibi. That's a good alibi for any crime that happens in the free world. So they obviously can't prosecute him. So they dismissed the charges against the two of them. 20 minutes later, they refiled charges against Tamara. Now, the prosecution's theory is that these two people commit this crime. I'm gonna cut to the chase on the story. They knew that this crime didn't happen. Prosecutors knew this crime didn't happen. Detectives knew this crime didn't happen. Tamara was being framed. 13 years later, about 2 weeks ago, well, before I get to it, a couple of weeks ago, in 2018, after circumstance over and over, circumstance again, Tamara finally gets in court, and she's filed a motion to recover, to have all of her files turned over. And, you know, they can keep a lot of different types of files on you, but this was the most thoroughly written motion I've ever seen. And I'll just tell you, and if anyone wants to explore this with me, I would love some help and guidance with it, because I'm not a lawyer and I don't have letters by my name. And this might be the most attention from a group or audience that I ever get. So I definitely want to encourage any support, anyone who's willing to help me make sense of this. So along the way of meeting Tamara, I'm initially getting her story, and it takes a little while for it to really click to me that her case is different. Most notably, every single thing that she's telling me is the truth. So the more and more that I look into it, I end up finding the YouTube video of the proceeding in 2018, where this motion for files to be released took place. It lasted about 9 minutes. The majority of the motion is the representative of the state explaining how thoroughly and extensively he's searched for these files. And he went on and on. It's like, I went here, I looked by I checked with the prosecutor, he's retired, I checked with the judge, I went to the archives where we keep all the digital files, I went to Taco Bell, nobody had the file. And I thought, okay, damn, that's a lot of places. And then I sat down, because I stood up hoping that he would get to it, and I'm excited. I sit down, and he keeps going on and on for about another 2 minutes. And then I went over here, and then I mean, you could not fathom. I mean, he looked for the files like they looked for Osama bin Laden. Like, that's how, or like they said, that's how extensive this search was. Nowhere to be found, nowhere to be found were these files. The motion was withdrawn at the judge's recommendation, given that he's got this answer that they can't find the files. And what does he do? What does the state representative do? What does the attorney do? Oh, well, that's it. That's it. So Tamara's predicament is that she's in this battle in this case with nothing to battle against. There's no file. There's nothing to disprove. A, because it didn't happen, but B, because there's no record. But Tamara didn't let that stop her. You know, one of the things that that makes the experience of working with Tamara so interesting is a project that we co-created. It's a page on Facebook that is a blog. And the way that we're uniquely using this blog is for all of the women in her prison who elected who want to, they connect with me through JPay. I post their writings, their reports, their observations, their poetry, whatever they want to share. It's a daily blog on Facebook. And it's called, I'll put it in the chat later, but it's called Miscarrying Justice League, which is a play on words. Miscarrying Justice League. And the reason why this matters to me is because as an innocent person, it's very easy to want to center yourself, to promote yourself, to separate yourself from the group. Oh no, I really deserve to be out. Tamara can make that case morally. But Tamara's more than moral. She's a humanist. She recognizes the suffering and the mistreatment in there, and it won't let her not include the voices of everyone else. So to this day, she's waiting on you. She tried waiting on this conviction integrity unit. She tried waiting on attorneys after attorneys after attorneys. But the point, the takeaway of it is incarceracism. You may think we're a country of laws. We've got a way that we do things. We've got processes that this happens every day. Her actual innocence is a key element that I want you to remember, but every single day in courtrooms, you have what I see, and everybody that I know who looks like me sees, which is a very incestuous court setup in which you have a judge, you have two adversarial representatives. We're not incapable of noticing that where you all work in the same place, like with any other workplace, does it ever make sense to have bad working relationships with your coworkers? No. You want your environment, don't you, to be smooth for you. You don't want people at your work to hate you. You want to, you negotiate situations, you give and take. Every one of these interactions, these negotiations, somebody's life's dependent on it. And it's not somebody else. Just think of me. I imagine most of you all have a friend or a loved one who's been behind bars. If you haven't, just use me as a stand-in. What I have seen inside throughout the entire legal process, from arrest to incarceration to reentry or reintegration, it is exactly the evolution of our chattel slavery process. Now, we don't talk about the period of history that some people refer to as the Reconstruction. We don't talk about convict leasing. So there is this kind of idea of a missing link. If you understand convict leasing and its era, you understand that, approaching 1890, about 70% of Alabama's revenue, state revenue, was made off of convict leasing. then you understand this is a very continuous system. It is evolving over time as our society does. But the ills that we have been complaining about for years, what was our problem has become our problem. Understanding through the lens of incarceration, the way that the reasons that people are allowed what they do, the reasons that people don't explore the policies of their politicians, the reason that we celebrate this very bipartisan rush to get to today's version of mass incarceration. I say that because we all know mass incarceration is not a new thing. That's how our nation started. Just make sure we're all on the same page. But this evolution of it today is it's more threatening, it's more subtle, and it's unfortunately very sustainable, which is why it's very important that everyone who's on this call is doing the work that you're doing. Can you give me a time marker, please, just so I know how much I've got left, Lucas?
Yeah, you got 1 minute.
Okay. I thought I put you to sleep there for a second. So I've got a minute left. To sum it up, think about it if you need to. Use it, because it is describing something that you feel that you run into on a consistent basis that we have not named until now. So I'll appreciate your help in conveying this idea. And I'll appreciate, thanks, Lucas. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, you didn't put me to sleep. I was very in thinking mode and everything. So, Dr. Ortez, you got a question? Oh, okay. When you're thinking, you're asking about like other folks and everything. Me and Dr. Ortez, she's the next speaker. We're both in a convict criminology group and everything. And they were looking for folks to bounce ideas off or write or anything. Let us know and everything. I found it, in 2015 after I got off probation and everything. And I'm very humbled to be around some awesome folks and everything. So I was thinking about, it was like, cause I'm fortunately I'm in a PhD program for philosophy and everything. So I was thinking in terms of like the being and everything. Like Heidegger talks about the being and everything, and how we're always changing, whether we like it or not, or we notice it. We never say the same, no matter. We can just sit here. Thanks for the Facebook. And so like I was pondering that. I was very much inspired, let's just say the least, by your presentation, because we're all doing this work for others, for survival, for ourselves. And plus, as a poet, I can totally understand and see and the need for having poetry and as part of like the autoethnography and everything. Could you kind of talk more about the Miscarrying Justice League? Kind of like if there's any publications or email blasts that folks can jump on and everything.
Sure. So the first thing that you can do, or the important thing to do, is to go to the Facebook page. This is relatively new. We started about a year ago, and it's a model. So Michigan's one of these states that has one women's prison total. I think there's maybe 12 to 15 such prisons or such states in the country. I'm hoping that this is an idea that other people will pick up. It literally takes one person out here to, to do the very simple work. I'm not getting hundreds of posts a day. Like you'll see, it's not overwhelming to just copy and paste from JPay over to Facebook. But when you're inside of prison, and I don't want this to sound trivial, when you're inside of prison, everything around you feels like it's designed just to tell you that you have no voice, that you don't matter. And many of these women who contribute have been in there for decades, some not so long, most for a very long time. To provide that connection on the other side, to just allow that connection to happen is, for me, it's very, very rewarding, because I've been on the other side like you have. I know what it feels like to feel that isolation. But to have responses, to have people out here in society do what I'm asking everyone on this call to do once you join, go through, find some comments, check in occasionally, like or don't like, but respond, engage, and let these people know that we see their humanity. And I recognize one thing that I don't feel like I said that I need to say, and I can put it in a sentence. With respect to incarceration, the thought process, the need for this term, one of the reasons I needed it was because you can literally graduate college in 2024 in America and hear and learn about racism and incarceration and never know the real story. You'll never know their interdependence. That is a problem, and it's a threat, given the styles of erasal of history that continue to go on today. So I switch back, just to backtrack. Miscarrying Justice League, I hope you found it. If you'll go on and find comments that resonate or points that resonate, and engage. That would mean the most to the people who matter the most today.
Yeah, totally. I think it would be a way, like, kind of circle back at the beginning regarding like we I don't think should ever have a day when we run out of talking about how fucked up labeling theory is, because it's like hegemony. Like, we don't see it, but it's real. It's a real thing that affects people, pushing and pulling. It's this huge, there's a huge, like, mechanics to it and everything that I think has only been studied in the last 30 years and everything. I mean, it's not just like calling someone, or it's literally all down to the molecule and the molecular and the atomic level of how someone's, like, being, of just, like, every day, like, oh fuck, my PO tells me I'm this, or parents telling me this, or I mean, like, just the whole story and everything is just a day of labeling theory. So yeah.
Yeah, today is my first day hearing these terms, hearing the word labeling theory. So it made sense as soon as I heard it. I heard after the second or third time, I got a little context with it. But I'm curious to hear more for sure. And some, I imagine I'll find it through your work, or you can point me to it. Any more questions I can answer for you? We've got about 4 minutes left, 3.5.
Anyone else has any? No, I think we're good. Thank you so much for presenting. This is amazing stuff. I'll definitely keep connecting with you and with others, and I'll definitely share the Facebook. So
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Feel free to reach out, and that goes for everyone in this room. If you're doing this type of work, you are my people. So allow me to be a resource or asset wherever possible. And same.
Right on. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you for everyone for participating and listening to your awesome questions. Our next awesome guest is Dr. Jennifer Ortez talking about the radical vision for prison abolition. Jennifer Ortez is Associate Professor of Criminology at the College of New Jersey. She earned her PhD in criminal justice from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Her research interests center on structural violence within the criminal justice system with a focus on gangs, reentry, post-incarceration. Her research has been published in leading correctional journals, including the Prison Journal, Corrections, Research Policy and Practice, and the Journal of Prisoners on Prisons. Ortez is the author of the recently published edited volume, Critical and Intersectional Gang Studies, which is an awesome, awesome piece of work. Ortez maintains a firm commitment to service and activism. She is currently the division chair for the American Society of Criminology's Division of Convict Criminology and book review editor for the Critical Criminology Journal. She previously served as president of the New Albany, Indiana Human Rights Commission as executive board member for Mission Behind Bars and Beyond, a Kentucky-based nonprofit reentry organization. Ortez is also the former research director for the New York State Permanent Commission on Sentencing.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Luca, for having me here today. It's been great to hear the presentations that I was able to hear. I feel like I've learned a lot on a whole variety of topics. And so today I am going to take the I guess utopian view. I'm presenting a chapter that was recently accepted titled A Radical Vision for Prison Abolition. It will be in a forthcoming edited volume titled Queer Abolition by Dr. Amy Woodard and Dr. Ellen Walker, that should come out later this year. And so I want to start off with merely just taking a second back. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but the U.S. criminal justice system is inherently deeply rooted in notions of injustice rather than justice. So as the Human Rights Watch website states, the United States has the largest reported prison population in the world, and many communities live under constant surveillance and fear of law enforcement. Killings by police are rampant. Court processes are often unfair, coercive, and overly punitive. Jail and prison conditions are often unsafe and inhumane. I think that this quote beautifully captures where we are in this injustice system, or as we call it, our criminal justice system. And yet, despite the fact that we have evidence to support every claim made in this quote from the Human Rights Watch, we still overall have a huge anti-abolition sentiment in our country, even amongst academics who study these issues, whose research identifies racial disparity and class disparity. There's still a genuine fear fear of embracing abolition as a potential. And that fear is driven in part because whenever people hear the term abolition, they envision a chaotic world filled with violent criminals preying on the innocent. And the reason why this is their first thought is because they have been indoctrinated for decades of their life with pro-criminal justice propaganda. In the United States, we receive thousands, not millions of images across our lifetime that depict the criminal justice system as a savior. That the criminal justice system prevents crime and it protects us innocents from these dangerous criminals in the bushes, and that if we don't have a criminal justice system, then everyone will get murdered. And we have this notion in part because of media, right? So these depictions, it's not a matter of chance that we have so many criminal justice shows in the US. I feel like every year we get 3 or 4 new pro-criminal justice TV shows. And we hold this image of the criminal justice system as a savior, despite the fact that decades of research tell us that the criminal legal system does not prevent crime. It allows the majority of crimes to go unsolved. And often the criminal justice system actually perpetuates secondary victimization of crime victims rather than actually helping them, right? Because statistics tell us that the demographic most likely to be victims of crime are young Black men, and yet those are the people least likely to be depicted as victims in these pro-criminal justice shows. And so we have a fear of the group that is most likely to actually be the victims of crime in our country. And so most US citizens or residents in the US have no idea what's actually happening in the criminal justice system. And I was part of this camp. I was the criminal justice is a savior kind of mentality, despite the fact that I grew up in a high crime neighborhood that had a lot of police misconduct and abuse. Right? I still held on to this view. And so I take a journey in my life, starting at about the age of 18, where I have this really idealistic view that I'm going to reform every part of the criminal justice system, starting with policing. I was going to be the police officer. I was going to become a police officer, and I was going to fix my neighborhood, and I was going to fix all the issues by myself. And then when I quickly realized that policing does not lend itself to reform, I moved on to sentencing. And that's how I become research director of the New York State Permanent Commission on Sentencing. And so I lose hope of being a one-woman reform army as an officer and switch my focus to being to affecting policy at that kind of what we researchers would call the macro level, or that bigger level. If I affect policy, if I change policy, I can affect a lot of people's lives. So for 4 years, I worked for the commission. This position allows me to meet directly with state officials. It allows me to meet with nonprofit organizations. And my primary role for them is kind of a support. So I would do statistical analyses and write reports that they would, in theory, use to write or inform legislation, because the chief judge had tasked this commission with rewriting the New York Penal Code. It took about 18 months to quickly realize that laws are not based on data. None of my reports were ever listened to. No one, the arguments after I presented a statistical analysis was essentially, well, I don't want to do that. And the biggest pushback was what I was suggesting was not good for their political careers. And so I realized that even in the policy sector, people are all about self-interest. So while I was going in with the hope of reforming things and making situations better for a lot of people, the reality was that the people that were in this space with me were more concerned with their own career advancement. And so in 4 years, we passed no legislation. We reformed no part of the New York Penal Code, despite this body being made up of over 25 criminal justice officials and nonprofit representatives. And then I decide to go into reentry space. My husband's formerly incarcerated. I'm a system impacted individual myself. And so I think I can help people on the ground level. And what I quickly realized in the reentry space and trying to help people is that although the state purports to have all this money for reentry, they actually pit these reentry organizations against each other because they're all fighting for the same small pools of grant money. And without grant money, they don't exist. These organizations don't exist. And so rather than being able to come together and provide wraparound services for the formerly incarcerated, they're too busy fighting each other for scraps off the table to be able to do the kind of work that they want to do, right? And this isn't to knock the nonprofits. This is really to knock the government style of funding nonprofit organizations. So through this journey from an 18-year-old to a 37-year-old now, I've moved from a reformer position to this position of being an abolitionist. Because I believe that a system that does not allow for reform, which is a system I stepped into in the policy world, is a system that at its very core is corrupt, because any good system should allow for reevaluation and reform and changes to procedures. So what is prison abolition? Well, prison abolition, I want to say, has its roots in anarchist literature that predates the prison abolition movement in the United States by about 100 years. But the prison abolition movement in the US really gets stronghold in the 1960s, when we're in this period of the civil rights movement and the LGBTQ rights movement. We also see the birth of kind of a prisoners' rights movement. And what is the big kind of breaking point of this and the really formation of prison abolition thought in more mainstream America was the Attica prison uprising. So the men in Attica Correctional Facility in New York decided to take the prison, and they had control of the prison for 4 days. And they took control of the prison as a way to protest their horrid living conditions. Attica is one of the oldest prisons, and it has 6x9 cells. The men were in those cells for 16 to 18 hours a day. There was horrible medical care. If there was any medical care, there was extreme abuses. And so the Attica prison uprising actually lets the public have an eye into what's happening in the correctional facility, because the governor of New York sent the National Guard into Attica with an order to fire at will, and they end up killing 39 individuals, both incarcerated people and correctional officers. And so the world is upset. And so Attica, like the doors of Attica are just blown open, and we can see. And so for a brief period, there's a push to improve prison conditions, right? And there's a growing movement of prison abolition. Now, as the war on crime is declared, the war on drugs is declared, and we see our crack cocaine hit all of our communities in the 80s, there's a shift away from prison abolition. That's where the pro-criminal justice narrative starts to be born, right? To kind of counter this movement of resistance against the state. And so I want to be clear that prison abolition, I don't speak for all prison abolitionists. Prison abolitionists, they all have their own varying goals and views of what prison abolition is and what it should be. What I'm presenting to you today is my case for prison abolition and realistic steps, I think, that could be implemented to move us towards prison abolition. So what would a world without prisons look like? And so my case for abolition is really for four main reasons. The first is that prison doesn't work. And so anyone who takes an intro to criminal justice course will be taught that there are, 5 goals of punishments, or 5 reasons why we punish. And amongst them are deterrence and rehabilitation. So deterrence meaning, if I punish you, you won't commit a crime again. I'll deter future criminal behavior. Rehabilitation means that as part of your punishment, we are somehow making you better or whole, addressing the underlying causes of your criminality, and then releasing you. So in theory, we're supposed to be doing these 2 things. That's supposed to be 2 of the goals of punishment. However, we're not achieving those 2 goals, or any of the goals really. But the 2 I'll focus on are deterrence and rehabilitation. Within 3 years of release from state prisons, 68% of individuals will be rearrested, and the rearrest rate increases to 79% at the 5-year post-release mark. So whenever politicians look at those numbers, they always portray it as there's something inherently wrong with these people, and that's why there's such high failure rates. But as a professor, I can say that if 79% of my students failed my class, I would be out of a job. They would fire me, because that would be a sign of me not doing my job well. But yet when it comes to incarceration, we look at recidivism as an individual problem, not as the system is inherently broken. I would argue the system is inherently broken. There is no real meaningful programming and rehabilitation. I will say that my perspectives are rooted in having interviewed and communicated with men and women incarcerated across 5 states in the United States, both in Middle America and on the East Coast. And so the system really isn't providing any meaningful programming. And so people are not being rehabilitated, and then they're just re-entering prison, right? We have this revolving door. Reason 2 is that crime is a consequence of society, not as a consequence of individual failing. And so in order to move your mindset into abolition, we have to reflect on our own biases and how they influence our views of people who break the law. The media tells us that if someone breaks the law, it is because of some individual failing, right? Some evil, this person is evil or morally corrupt, while ignoring all the structural and societal level factors that research tells us contributes to people's decisions to engage in criminal behavior, right? Of most importance being economic inequality, and lack of education, right? So in the US, we don't have universal health care, we don't have universal education, and so you can only really get as much treatment and education as you can afford. And so that excludes a whole group of people from even having the means to kind of elevate themselves or elevate their social status. Incarceration is morally reprehensible. So the American Civil Liberties Union and the Global Human Rights Center in a report identified violations of, quote, the most fundamental human rights to life and dignity within the American correctional system, end quote. So the rest of the world, and both at the national and international level, view our incarceration system as a violation of human rights, as the ways in which we incarcerate people in the US. Incarceration can also be condemned, and thank you to the previous presenter, Kyle, for mentioning this. There's a connection. There's a deep historical connection between anti-Black racism and our system of punishment in the United States. And I won't go in depth into it, but if you're interested in this argument, Michelle Alexander's book, the new Jim Crow paints this argument very clearly. And then Luc Quant is a French theorist who was talking about this connection in the 1990s, the connection between anti-Black racism in the US and our systems of punishment. And so the connection between racism and punishment is still very clear today, right? So today, people of color are more likely than white individuals to be stopped by the police, searched by the police, experience physical force by the police, be killed by the police, be arrested for a petty offense, be denied bail, be falsely accused of a crime, and receive longer sentences, including the death penalty, right? So we know that the system is heavily skewed against people of color, and particularly against Black individuals and Black men. And lastly, incarceration is counterproductive. We know that there are underlying causes of a person's decision to engage in criminality, right? And the most important ones that I think we are aware of now is mental health issues and economic disadvantage. Incarceration exacerbates mental health, right? It makes mental health worse. Prisons are very traumatic places. Being incarcerated is a very traumatic experience. It is like being traumatized from the minute you wake up to the minute that you go to sleep. And so people who already have mental health issues coming into prison now have the mental health issues are made worse because of the experience of being incarcerated. Add to that formerly incarcerated individuals with criminal records are less likely to obtain employment. They will earn lower hourly wages and have lower lifetime earnings than people who have never experienced incarceration. So incarceration is counterproductive because it actually makes the reasons why people engage in crime worse rather than trying to improve it, right? So whatever the opposite of rehabilitation would be. And so those are my arguments for why we should do this. And so how do we start to envision a world without prison? Well, I think the most important thing I want to convey is that prison abolition does not mean opening the prison doors and letting everyone out tomorrow. The abolition is a process and it takes time, right? It is a marathon, it is not a sprint. And the only way to achieve prison abolition is take a step back and make living experiences better for all of us in society, right? Can we address the underlying causes of criminality at on a large scale, on a societal scale? So in the US in particular, we don't have healthcare. So that means individuals who have mental health issues largely go untreated or undertreated until they interact with law enforcement. Unfortunately, jails are the largest mental health providers in the United States. And once we would have well-funded healthcare, we could have mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment. So we know that the incarcerated population has higher rates of substance use disorder than the free population. We know that there are higher rates of mental health issues and mental illness in correctional facilities. If we address those issues before they enter the system, right, we will inevitably need less prisons because we'll incarcerate less people over time. We can also do this by funding education, right? So the education system in the US, excuse me, if you're not in the US, is based on property taxes. So the value of the homes around a school is going to determine how much funding the school gets, not how many children the school has. And so that means that individuals from impoverished neighborhoods go to schools that have less funding. So these children are beginning life at a significant disadvantage. And so a way that we could change this is changing the ways in which we fund education, making education based on a per student rate as opposed to a property value rate. And so the pushback we always get with abolition is, okay, this is nice, but how are we going to pay for this? Well, in the US, I would say that the easiest way we could pay for this is to have some type of business regulation. And so, for example, in my paper, which I'm willing to share with anyone, I make the argument that we need to regulate CEO to worker compensation, how much a CEO is legally allowed to make in comparison to how much the lowest paid employee is making. And this is the income ratio. And in addition to that, raising the federal minimum wage to $20 an hour, which is only $42,000 a year. I know we talk about $15 an hour, but $20 an hour is only $42,000 a year, which for a single person would be enough to sustain themselves, even in some major cities. On top of that, we would increase the corporate tax rate. So the corporate tax rate in the US today is 22%. It's less than half of what it was in 1980, which was 46%. It's not a matter of chance that as we slash corporate taxes, poverty increases in the US and the prison population also subsequently increases. The money that we gave to corporations had to come from somewhere, and it overwhelmingly came from social services and education. I would also advocate for an individual income tax that it's based on a sliding scale where the highest earners pay higher taxes, including on capital gains taxes, and then the lower your income, the lower your overall tax rate. So this is a structure that's similar to Canada. So in the US, this seems kind of like utopian, but a lot of what I just discussed already exists in most developed countries in the world, right? So this isn't as radical as you might even think. And so some people will say, well, okay, well, even in the societies that have healthcare, that have education, that have business regulation, there's still crime. There's always going to be some crime. There's always going to be some violation of the laws in which we all agree upon. No one's always going to conform. And so I do want to address the fact that people who break the law have to receive some consequence. There has to be a consequence to breaking a law that we in society agreed to. So the first thing I would do is I would advocate for the decriminalization of all drugs. So I mean decriminalizing drug use, not drug dealing or drug trafficking. And so decriminalizing drug use and treating it as a medical issue. And if we were to have a funded healthcare system, then those people could seek treatment and could receive treatment for their substance issues rather than going to prison or jail where they're still able to obtain illegal narcotics. For nonviolent individuals, and I'm sorry if I'm rushing through this, I know I'm running a little bit short on time. I would advocate, so I would say first that nonviolent offenses are the most common offenses in the United States. According to the FBI, 2,109 property crimes happen for every 100,000 individuals living in the United States. That's 7 times higher than the violent crime rate. So the majority of people in prison, majority of people going to be incarcerated, are going to be for nonviolent offenses. And so property crimes are motivated by financial need. And so these individuals would be best served through some restorative or transformative justice practice, right? Why are you stealing? What's the problem? What is the situation? But also, I believe that for the victim, it's far better for this person to receive care than for this person to end up being incarcerated. And so studies tell us that victims of nonviolent offenses are willing to engage in mediation. And when we ask people, victims of nonviolent offenses, about their opinions regarding the punishment that was handed down, they oftentimes do not actually agree with the punishment that's handed down by the courts. So with violent offenders, just to be quick, I would advocate that for violent offenses, we need a more trauma-informed lens. We need to understand that the person engaging in violence was likely a victim of violence at some point, right? Hurt people, as the saying goes. And so to address violent crimes, I would actually advocate for developing treatment centers based on crime type. So for example, an individual who has a sex offense would be treated for the underlying urges of that sex offense, right? And then trying to identify what their underlying causes of criminality are. And so in this case, the person is receiving treatment as opposed to punishment. And the length of treatment would be based on individualized assessment. And assessment would be done by people who actually understand psychology and understand trauma rather than by a judge or a criminal justice official who is not trained in those things. And so I'll end on this note. There are a lot of myths about abolition, right? People believe that abolition means anarchy. I'm not advocating for anarchy, although I know abolition comes from anarchist thought. I do believe that we can have government and we can still have punishment, but not prison. Abolition will not actually increase crime because if we were to improve social conditions, crime would decrease. The US has the highest crime rate of any developed nation in the world, and it's not a matter of chance. Inequality drives that. And then myth 3, that abolition means people can just get away with crime. I'm not advocating for people to be allowed to do whatever they want and receive no punishment. I'm advocating for a system that is humanizing and for us to switch our mindset within thinking about abolition. Abolition requires us to change how we think about punishment. Punishment is not to hurt people. Punishment is to repair harm caused by a particular action. And prison does nothing to repair the harm done to the victim, done to the actual defendant, or done to the community. So I'm advocating for justice rather than for punishments. And that's all I got. Thank you, Luca. I know I'm like 2 minutes over.
Yeah. No, thank you. That was an awesome wrap up. I've been an abolitionist since I got a little shit with the system, and maybe this is a paper topic, or maybe this is something that you struggle with, or any abolition struggle with, of kind of like the everydayness of abolition. Like, what is it like to, like, every single day, besides go to conferences or write something, or like, what does it mean to you, like kind of the everydayness of abolition? Like, what do you do? Or I don't, like, I think that's where a lot of people like get lost, versus, like, I mean, sometimes, like, obviously, like, well, there'll be no cops, there'll be anarchy or whatever, but like, what do you do, like, every day, versus just having protests once in a while, that you have those like-minded people and everything?
Well, one, I will say that the first step is always education. I think when I tell someone I'm a prison abolitionist, the first thing that they like, their face is just horror, right? It's like, oh, you're one of those, right? And then when I sit down and have a conversation with them about what abolition means, a lot of them get on board with me. I think the only pushback I ever get is like with the violent offense category, which is why I advocate that there is some kind of institution, but it's not a prison, right? It is a treatment place, right? So what I usually say is, first it's education, right? And then once we have a collective consciousness about what prison does, right? The average person has no idea what happens in prison. They are, it's like Orange is the New Black and Oz is like their frame of reference for like prison. And so my thing is education first. But also, we need to bring the voices of people who are formerly incarcerated into these spaces in which decisions are being made. On the Sentencing Commission, there were no formerly incarcerated people at those tables. There were no men of color at that table having a conversation about laws that would disproportionately impact men of color. They weren't even there. And so, as you know, Luca, but as I'll share with others, part of what I do with Convict Criminology is bringing individuals with lived experience to these spaces where these policymakers are, and then incorporating their voices into it. I believe that we need to build like a critical mass of people, and I hope that I'm doing that, and I hope that even if one person is like, I can get on board with that, then we slowly build like a momentum.
Right on. Dr. Nagel, you have a question, comment? I have to.
Thank you. Yes, so I've been involved in abolition for a few decades. Also helped foil a jail expansion in central New York. And the New York Times was very curious how we did that. And so I totally get it, what you're saying, obviously. I'm just wanting to see if we can push you a little further on the abolitionists, because frankly, to me, it sounds very reformist still, what you're presenting. It's, this is a forum. I've been with this forum for a number of years. And so abolitionism and anarchism is sort of go hand in hand. So I'm glad you're presenting an alternative perspective, right? As I argued in my recent book that sort of sums up my work, 4 different books on abolition, the restorative justice lends itself very much more to a punitive and reformist approach than a transformative justice approach. So let's just quibble with some name dropping that you mentioned. Bacon. Before Bacon, there was Angela Davis, who was a fugitive of law, a philosopher. And, right. And so she mentioned the criminalization of the Black men before Bacon, got to it. But because, she was a communist, Marxist, and abolitionist, her work was not uplifted. And to me, it was a bit of a shock to see Michelle Alexander's work really getting widespread support, when it was a very much a liberal kind of tame conversation. And I know Alexander shifted, the more she ran into people like Davis, the conversation was like, well, maybe we'll need to. So my worry specifically is that you want to do decriminalization of drugs only partly, but those drug dealers, they're still facing punishment. Well, if those drug I mean, there's lots of conversations we can have about that, but specifically, let's enter the murky territory of state violence, right? So you mentioned racism or, these systematic oppressions, but if the DEA is running the drug show and supplying the North American drug market, as a former Panther shared with me, they were in the 60s flushing and 70s flushing down the toilet, the drugs, that were flooding the neighborhood, right? And with mafia support, police support, and such, so when the system is so violently criminal, right? Why is it that we're only focusing on the street crime, on the individualized approach? I hope that makes any sense to
I
you.
don't know who we are. All of my research focuses on structural violence. All of my research is about state violence. It's about how the structure is inherently violent. Every one of my pieces focuses on structural violence. So if you mean we as in the collective US we, then I could see your arguments. I will also say that I don't believe I'm a reformer. I don't believe any prisons should exist at all. I'm calling for the complete, like if I could take sledgehammers to them myself, I would. That is my position. I do not believe prisons should exist in any form at all. So I am an abolitionist. I'm not a reformer. I don't believe in reform. I'm not sure if you joined us later in my conversation, but I worked in the policy world for 4 years. And so I worked directly trying to change policy. So I'm really aware that reform is not possible. And so I don't take a reformer stance. I used to take a reformer stance. I don't anymore. But I completely agree with you. I think structural violence is a much bigger problem. The reason why I'm focusing on decriminalizing drugs is one, I'm a former drug dealer, and two, I grew up with a father who was substance addicted. And so I saw the very real implications of that for his children and for us growing up. And then me subsequently becoming a drug dealer to make money because my substance addicted father, snorted his paycheck up his nose every week. Right. And so I come from this perspective of lived experience. And I think that's why I view things the way that I view them. Now, if anyone would want to make a case why drug dealers should be allowed to continue to operate, by all means, I just don't necessarily, when I say decriminalize drugs, like I'm not in the camp that believes that heroin should be legal and you should be able to use it recreational. I'm married to a former heroin addict, and I know full well when I met him, he was an active heroin addiction. I helped get him sober. We've been together 15 years now. And so I've seen the effects of drugs directly in my life and the men and families in my life. And so again, that was my vision of prison abolition, right? Everyone's vision can be different. And I would admit, maybe I'm not as, progressive as some other abolitionists, but I definitely know that in the criminology space, I'm probably the most militant abolitionist that we have, except maybe Angela Davis, but even she's moved away from complete abolition in some of her recent work.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, Dr. Jennifer Ortez, amazing speaker and activist and everything.
Thank you for having me.
Stay dangerous. All right. Next speaker, Dr. Nagel, and is your co-host.
Dr. Nagel, can you share the PowerPoint? Hello to all.
Hello.
Dr. Nagel, we can't hear you. You were talking just a few minutes ago.
I gotta make them co-host. All right. Right on. There you go.
Thank you. Hello to all. We're just waiting for Dr. Nagel to bring up the PowerPoint, and we will certainly try to use our 20 minutes efficiently. I'm not used to, wait a minute, Dr. Nagel. There we go. Perfect. So we bring you greetings. My name is Dr. Tracy Hudson, and my partner in crime is Dr. Mecca Nagel. We bring you greetings from the State University College of Cortland, New York. where it's nice and cold. And today's presentation is going to be on finding joy and peace. It's an autoethnographic reflection of Sophia's Garden. Next slide, please. Mecca? Mecca, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Unmute, yeah. Okay, thanks for unmuting me. Please keep it that way, Lucas. Thank you. Right, so basically we bring to you just an overview and objections of what we're doing with the Sophia's Garden project. That came, out of my own abolitionist work and looking at work, basically abolitionist education work, looking at children pre-K to through 5th grade middle school. And we've done it for almost a decade now in the area schools, and with great success working with volunteers from my classes who help read picture storybooks, which have a lot of diversity, social justice, sometimes abolitionist readings. And so we wanted to share some of that with you. Right. So in terms of our research objectives, we want to share with you that we to gain deeper insights into the transformative potential of our approach of teaching philosophy and critical thinking, diversity, education, positive peace studies, in this what we call Sophia's Garden, where Sophia basically means wisdom in Greek, where we grow wisdom. And we examine the impact on teaching practices and our personal growth. We want to understand the cultivation of joy and peace amidst conflicts. So let's see.
So our methodologies, one is near and dear to me. It's autoethnographic. So simply put, this methodology allowed us to really just write about our own personal experiences as professors as we implemented our theories of practice and reflected on how these experiences related to creating really a peaceful world through children and play. So during play, children will seamlessly engage in many big, bold, and provocative topics. So in our work, in this research particularly, we brought to the surface 3 emerging topics. Next slide, please. So in our work, the emerging topics that we saw were conflict, naturally with young people. They had disagreements and they found win-win solutions. Another topic that resonated was care. Young people, particularly young people, they have a natural way of being empathetic towards one another. Adults, we can certainly take a lesson. And then thirdly, the theme that emerged was community. Like young people totally know how to work together to complete a task. And so those were the 3 emerging themes that resonated in our work. There were many more, but these 3 really just kind of stood out. Next slide.
Right. And so we want to share with you briefly Ubuntu philosophy, invitational education philosophy, and nested care. And so Ubuntu philosophy, which is what my recent book is about on decolonizing justice, one way of thinking about the Southern African ethic is using actually a Kenyan philosopher, theologian who turned the Cartesian ego-centric view around, put it into an Afrocentric perspective, and say, I am who I am because of you, who you are. And to basically say that intersubjectivity of knowing the humanity of myself is deeply connected to others recognizing me as human. Yeah, and so from there, a number of things follow, and one of them is connected to punishment themes. That who am I to punish others? what is my role in the society, and specifically a community perspective, that how is it as a community that we have failed somebody who has gone off and committed something that could be considered, that is a harm or could be considered a harm, right? So it's really the onus is more on the community than the individualist perspective of settler colonial legal system. And specifically Africans, I found are, when I've interviewed them in conversation, also within an ethnographic project, let me remind you, Dr. Nagel, that prisons were a colonial and European and Western or American invention. We never incarcerated anybody. So
you can go ahead and click that a couple of times. There you go. Yeah. So the other philosophy that we used in Sophia's Garden, as Dr. Nagel and I came together, was my own personal philosophy that I used to frame my work, and it's called invitational education. And so invitational education is an educational theory of practice really based on the imaginative act of hope that explains how human potential can be realized. It asserts that all people, all students are able, valuable, and responsible and should be treated as such. It is based on, as you can see, these three theoretical foundations. The three theories are essential, and it's the pillar of invitational education. It's democratic ethos, perception theory, and self-concept, which together form the foundation of creating this nurturing and empowering learning environment. So with the democratic ethos, it simply says that really, literally, all voices matter. Okay, all voices matter. It's ruling by majority, and when everyone has a say in the situation or the matter at hand. Every voice in democracy matters. Perception tradition or perception theory. It is how each person comprehends or sees an event. So we can be looking at the letter number 6, and depending on where you stand, will basically dictate your view. And we have to appreciate others' perspectives. And so we teach our young students this through invitational education. And of course, the last one is self-concept. Perception plays a critical role in shaping and contributing to self-concept. It's the messages that we send to our young people, messages about beauty, messages about behavior, messages about acceptable behavior, messages about success. And it influences an individual's self-concept as they internalize these societal standards. Now, of course, positive feedback, like positive affirmations that we give all day to our students in Sophia's Garden, and a supportive interacting environment can contribute to a positive self-concept. While on the other hand, a negative feedback or negative experiences may lead to a negative self-concept. Next slide, please. And so based on the invitational framework, I use what's called in my daily walk, the I-Court framework. So based on the theory of invitational education, I use a I-Court framework, and at the center is intentionality and intersectionality. Intentionality just simply means you are aligning your goals with intent to the values that you believe. If you believe all students are able, valuable, and responsible, then your goals should be aligned to that. Intersectionality means that we're taking into consideration all the identities that these young folks are bringing into the space and understanding that their identities may or may not align with your identity, particularly as a teacher. And then when we move around this framework, I have 4 other elements. The first element is the C, which stands for care, having that level of empathy. And then the next letter is optimism, helping students to see that their future is bright. They may not be there yet, but they're getting there. And respect, what kind of messages do we send to students? And trust, building those positive relationships. Now, this I-Court framework is based on the theory of invitational education, but I use this I-Court framework as my lens when I'm addressing the needs of young people. In fact, the class that I teach is a pre-service class for future teachers. They're all seniors, and I have introduced this work to them as well. Next slide, Mecca.
Mm-hmm. Right. So this approach, again, connects with invitational theory and Ubuntu theory. It really comes from an indigenous perspective. I've read it first really from from northern, northwestern indigenous peoples, of sharing, you know, the settler colonial system is very much wedded metaphysically, ontologically, to an individualized penal approach that colludes with a nested care approach. One way of looking at it is with the work of Department of Social Services, when they indicate somebody, or somebody is hotlining, maybe a mad relative, friend, whatever. It's like, I know these people are co-sleeping. Yeah. So when you have parents, immigrant parents, say Africans, for instance, Caribbean, and they have the audacity to share a bed with their children, that is disallowed. It's actually criminalized. The nested care approach says that we need to turn the table and see the kind of care given to children, children of all ages, but very critically from newborns, toddlers, to say seventh, when they turn 7, needs to be a very different one. So, this is something that we take to heart in Sophia's Garden as well, of looking at emphasizing positive touch. There's picture books that celebrate, peace through giving hugs and such. But also there are picture books that talk about, visiting daddy in prison. I have not looked at Mariam Kaba's recent picture book, but I'm very excited to see that penal abolitionists are also going into the young children's pictures, story picture book media, and also sharing that kind of positive piece, and critiquing the unnested care, of ripping parents, caregivers out of the children's, world, and often without much understanding what's going on, from a child's perspective. Anyway, there's a lot to be considered with nested care, but in the interest of time, we continue with the impact on teaching practices.
So the impact on teaching practices. So go ahead, Mecca, click the next slide. So the impact on teaching practices, an acronym that we just decided to come up with just recently is the word play. Just the word play. So if we break down each letter in the word play, the first word is philosophy. And this is what Sophia's Garden is really based on. So we look at philosophy. And in Sophia's Garden, we ask students to question, to be curious, right? We don't want to stifle that. So in Sophia's Garden, we embrace that. So that's our P in play, philosophy. We want our students to question, to be curious. And then the L in play, and we do this in Sophia's Garden, is literacy. We want our students to understand and to critically analyze. We want them to ask those questions. We want them to think deep. And we do this through our picture books and our stories. We had a session today, and the students were just wonderful. And it just brings us such great joy to be with them. And then we talk about the A in play, which means adventure. We want our kids to self-discover, right? We want them to be adventurous. We want them to be able to move beyond and move beyond their comfort zone, self-discovery. And then the last letter in play is yearn. We want our students to have a strong desire for joy, and we never want to crush their joy. And Sophia's Garden allows us to do this. It allows us to bring our students into a space where they feel comfortable and they're able to ask questions without being interrupted or stifled. And it's just a beautiful place for our children to be. And then somewhere along their education, these things are taken away from them. So play, P-L-A-Y, can provide and influence pedagogical approaches to conflict. Because during our play in our program, Sophia Garden, we allow our students to process and to confront conflict in a way where there's a win-win resolution, and we're learning to work with others. Next slide, please. So I love this picture. I add this picture to everything that we do with Sophia's Garden. And if you knew these students, you would just clutch your pearls because they're just so beautiful. And so see, Sophia's Garden is a program for students all year long outside. So I have a winter picture and I have probably a fall picture. So even in the winter, we're outside and the kids are just loving the nature and uninterrupted. They're outside playing and we're reading books by campfires. That's us. That's probably me. I just probably played a game called Selfie Tag. I don't have a real camera, but we get behind me and I have my hands up kind of like this, like I'm taking a picture, and I have them express themselves. I'll tell them, I'll give them a cue to express yourself as someone who's has a funny face, or show some expression if you like ice cream, or just allowing kids just to express themselves. And the second picture, I'm not sure if you can see this, but I wish I can blow it up. There's a African-American boy there. He has locks in his hair. And I think I had them imagining being a superhero, and he was flying through the air, hands by his side, and the wind was blowing through his locks. It was just so beautiful to see him be a superhero. I'm not sure if that happens all the time with our children, particularly children of color, male children of color. And so I love this picture because it shows his uninterrupted joy as he was flying through the air with his cape and his wind blowing, and the wind blowing through his locks. I love it. Next picture, Mecca.
Right. And so just concluding our project, looking at the impact of it to empower the students to become active, informed, engaged citizens. We equip them with skills, knowledge, and values, and they're making a positive impact in communities and contribute to a more just and equitable society. And we also find that for the college students specifically, their mental wellness, their mental health is positively influenced. And so they're looking forward to coming to the forest school and learning from the children just as much as the children learn from them. So call to action. Basically, I'm also an education abolitionist to rethink K through 12 completely, get the kids out of the neon lit classrooms into oxygen-filled, adventure playgrounds of the great outdoors. And some of them, teenagers, have just built more than a house with a stove, and none of them have ever had formal education, but they know how to build a house. So there we have it, and we'll stop now for Q&A.
20 minutes, we're good.
Yeah,
Right.
that's perfect. Good team.
Yes, thank you.
And we didn't even practice. We didn't do a run through at all.
What?
Wow.
Yes.
Amazing. So I have a couple questions. One might be a little esoteric. So I've been reading Kant for my PhD program, and he talks about play as a very intricate part of it, everything. But like student or kids growing up, and we all grown up because we're all ex-kids, like play was the thing to do when you work or other things, around the house. Chores were done. It was just an added thing. But it's really cool that it's like you kind of retaken it as like, well, play can be fun and educational. Like, like most 90s like TV shows, like I mean, they're harmful as hell, but I mean that's the that's the point of everything. What kind of like reception have you gotten from like parents and like other teachers with Sophia's Garden?
Well, first of all, the program is intentional. So I'll go back to my framework. So it's all planned play. The kids don't have to know that this is planned play. They're just having fun. So remember,
Nice.
it's about intentionality. Like when you know better, you do better. When you're in a position where you know the power of play, you set it up as such. So we know that they're going to have conflict. We know that it's competition. So we guide them to understand how to process conflict and competition. Like they don't know what they're doing. They're just going with their natural instinct, their natural ways of thinking. It's the adults that will either stifle or help students grow. And so Dr. Nagel and I, we're just a dynamic team together, and we really just really feed off each other so we understand intentionality.
Mhm. Right. So that's the Sophia's Garden part. When they are by themselves for the other 8 hours, the adults ask them, so what do you want to learn today? You know, where are we going? And then they're structuring things so to support that. And so they're little physicists and chemists and biologists, and they're learning to read as they wish to do, right? And some of them wish to do that age 4, and some a little later, right? So it's an Emilio Reggio inspired approach. And you know, democratic education, that the children, you know, of to really think about the harmful effects of adultism, that the children also play a role. And when we look at the nested care approach, it's actually the children, lo and behold, are the center of the community rather than pushed to the side completely. Yeah.
And one of the things I will add is I always think about this as a former K-12 principal for 20 years. Many of the students in the Sophia's Garden program, and actually in that school, they probably wouldn't make it in regular school because these students have free spirit, you know, and they're moving, they're rolling. Even in Sophia's Garden, they're rolling, and you know, we just kind of allow them to be who they are because they never miss a beat from the reading. Like, we can ask where they are; they know exactly where we are in the reading, and so we allow them to have mastery over their environment. It's their environment. But in the classroom, sit in your chair, don't move, don't do this, don't stand up. Da, da, da. And that's not their spirit. So I'm really appreciative of Sophia's Garden bringing this type of program to students who are non-traditional students, I'll say, students with a lot of spirit and joy.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I had a question, but I forgot what it was. Uh, no, I think it was more like kind of like day to day on the ground and everything, like kind of like the regimented unregimentality of it, how it worked and everything. Like you didn't like, you know, drive to an empty field and like, okay, so here's garden time, you know, and the kids just kind of work itself out or whatever they're gonna do and everything. So
Well,
um
sometimes Tracy has to find them in the field or climbing trees. Like, oh, we're doing hide and seek, and then she goes off and climbs trees. Or
I can climb
sometimes,
a tree. I climbed a tree. I'm 57, but I got up there.
right? And sometimes we had in another forum we sat around a fireplace, and there was a tree next, and there was one yogi guy, and he just climbed a tree, and then occasionally he piped down from the tree. Oh, I have something to say on Plato's Cave or something. Yeah.
oh
it's giving, okay, you don't want to sit on the bench now or on a rock or on a tree stump, you know, it's like, well, be in a living, you know, tree and share your thoughts. And nobody thought that was untoward, and you know, they were not chastised. So I mean, as Michel Foucault says, right, why is it that schools resemble factories, which resemble prisons, which then resemble schools or something like that in the history of prisons? So what if schools didn't resemble prisons? Wouldn't that be amazing? The imagination would soar, all the stuff that Immanuel Kant took so seriously, you know, in play of the imagination, they actually got it. You know, we have very deep thinkers there, philosophers, right? So
right on. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's really bad to like when you're driving past a building, like is it a school or a prison? You know, I mean, in the end, it's the same. Um, how many students are in the program?
college
How,
students.
how many students? Yeah.
So yeah, I have between 30 and 50 college students,
Okay.
and half a dozen TAs who also help supervise the logistics. And they just come wide-eyed from that experience back to the drudgery of the college and their test taking and things. I don't do tests either in my classes.
Right
It's
on. You guys have a few minutes left. Is there any things you want to mention or put your links in the chat so people can learn more
oh
about?
yeah, can put Sophia's Garden in the
Yeah.
link. Yeah, right. Oh, okay, very good. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
And yeah, it's basically quite the national movement, somewhat international too now, of teaching philosophy in various schools, but nobody really has gone into forest schools. So when Dr. Hudson and I teamed up, that was just really took it to a whole nother level for me. So, and I don't see it right now. Where's the chat? Share screen.
Oh,
Chat.
I think it's good. Yeah.
I'll just send it to you and you can.
Yeah. I'll send it to me. So, yep, I got it. Cool. Well, thank you so much. This kind of almost answers my question from the last one. Like, what does everydayness of like abolition look like? And it's like this. It's like literally a field with a ball and yogiing up a tree and citing, or quoting Kant and Plato. So there you go.
All in one.
All the way.
All at the same time.
Right on. Cool. Thank you so much. You guys this is very inspirational. Thank you so much. All right. Last but not least, this awesome conversation on labeling and abolition and all sorts of stuff is Lizette Batmanga Hughes' discussion of curriculum on racial justice and abolition democracy centering the experiences of marginalized communities. Lizette Batmanga Hughes is a curriculum director for the Racial Justice and Abolition Democracy Project at Columbia University. She used to teach for close to a decade in NYC schools, but after involvement with the legal system, she found a new sense of purpose in speaking out for the people who are in carceral spaces. For this reason, Lizette joined Hudson Link for Higher Education and Prison, which provides college programming and reentry services to people who are incarcerated in New York State. Lizette cherishes the Nelson Mandela quote, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Awesome. And you are you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lucas. I really appreciate it. And good evening, everyone. These have been very interesting presentations. I wish Jennifer Ortiz was still here because a lot of the things that she was saying resonated with me and actually go hand in hand with the reason why we even started this curriculum. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Okay. So as mentioned, my name is Lizette Hughes, and I will be talking to you today about the curriculum that we're working on racial justice and abolition democracy. So in RJAD for short. So this curriculum is named after the inspiration of W.E.B. Du Bois, who argued that abolition of slavery should have been accompanied by means in which freed Blacks could economically sustain themselves, have access to educational institutions, and the right to exercise their civil duties in order to achieve what he coined abolition democracy. So when enslaved people were freed, they weren't given any resources to be able to be productive members in society. This is very parallel, similar. It's the parent, if you wish, of our current legal system, where people who are released from prison aren't given any resources either to be able to re-enter the society. And this is where Dr. Ortiz's talk really resonated with me, in that then it explains the increased number of recidivism in the formerly incarcerated population. And not only are they released without any resources, then there's also this big stigma attached to them, which prevents them from obtaining, right, good employment or sometimes education or housing, because now there's this perpetual punishment, perpetual mark on their record. So I'm based in New York State, and in New York State, we just passed the Clean Slate Act, which after a certain amount of time after release and with no further involvement with the legal system, people are able to have their convictions sealed and or not accessible to certain entities like employers or housing, et cetera, to enable to help them re-enter society. But it's, you know, about 7, 8 to 10 years before that mark is removed. So anyhow, back to the curriculum. So what is our curriculum? This is a prototype, national upper division action-oriented multidisciplinary curriculum program involving the humanities, arts, social sciences, public policy, law. Although it is being developed at Columbia University, once we are done with it, we will share it widely to other colleges and universities, but also to community-based organizations, because we don't believe that only students, college students, should have access to this information, but people in the community should be educated in all of the things that we're talking about, which I will get into in a little while. And also, we want this to be taught in college and prison programs. So I personally also teach in higher education and prison programs in New York State. And so this is something that I discuss with my students, and they were actually very an integral part of designing this curriculum. So the goal of this curriculum is to increase learning about the history of racial injustices and encourage students and participants to reimagine a more fair and just society without jails and prisons. And just like Dr. Ortiz, who spoke earlier, I too don't believe that, I believe that it's a process, right? It's not something like, okay, tomorrow everybody, needs to be released, because just like we saw in slavery, releasing people without proper support doesn't help, right? And therefore making sure that we have the proper community support before these people are released is what is necessary. Okay. So who's working on RJAD? Well, the Square One project, which is at the Justice Lab in Columbia University, and the Initiative for a Just Society, which is at the law school in Columbia, partnered with community-based organizations and other colleges and universities in order to work on this curriculum. So it is spearheaded by a formerly incarcerated curriculum director, which is me. And the RJAD curriculum is being designed, developed, and tested collaboratively with a diverse team, which includes currently and formerly incarcerated people. So I said to you, some of my students were very an integral part of designing this curriculum. So some of the people who are collaborating on this effort are academics, are advocates and leaders, artists, lawyers, abolitionists. And again, abolitionist is a spectrum. So there's been some challenges because there are some people in the group who believe that, we should do away with prisons today, who don't believe we should bring remedy inside the prison because it's a waste of time. It's just pacifying folks, and we need to do away with it today. And then there are people on the opposite side of the abolitionist spectrum who believe that it needs to be a gradual process where people, like I mentioned, need to be ready from outside already. So there's been some, very interesting debates, but that's the beauty of working on this team, was that, everybody's opinion was important. And this curriculum is not a doctrine, or it's not something that's preachy for one or the other. it presents a spectrum. So how was the curriculum developed? Well, there was a survey. I sent out a survey of two directly impacted people, and that included people who had themselves been incarcerated or who had loved ones who had been incarcerated. And we really wanted to know, because we didn't want this curriculum to just be top down, right? So here we are in the ivory towers of Columbia University telling people what they should learn and how they should practice racial justice, right? We wanted to hear from the people who are the most impacted by racial injustice, right? So sent out the survey to various networks that represent marginalized communities, formerly incarcerated people particularly, and also took sent an abridged version of the survey to a couple of my colleagues who also teach inside, and so we were able to have kind of like focus group discussions with our currently incarcerated students. And some of the questions were, what changes they would like to see that would make life better and stand in the way of change, or in what stands in the way of change. And so, their answers were kind of put into groups, which then became the pillars for the core courses of this curriculum. So people were really interested in making sure that folks, that were not necessarily from their community knew about the history of race in America, right? How did race first come about, and how race was tied to capitalism? And so this is where the racial capitalism course comes into, and how then slavery, engendered incarceration and mass incarceration, and the police in the first place. And there goes the policing, prison, and punishment in America. And then, the last course is kind of like, okay, well, this is where now we want to reimagine what, living in a society, living in democracy that practices abolition looks like, right? What are some of the services? What are some of the resources that needs to be provided to people after release? And then there were other themes that arose, like, health and reentry and affordable housing. And so all of those are also then put into electives. Another question that was asked was, what would you like people to do after experiencing this curriculum, right? And that was really important. And some of the responses were very, very heartfelt, right? Because there was this big notion of once you know better, you do better. And so one of the things that people wanted, one of the things that people, the marginalized people that were interviewed wanted to come across is that they wanted people to get involved. Once you knew about, the injustices and the history of these injustices, you were not to walk away the same. You were not to walk away not being able to do nothing, right? So they wanted people to get involved, so that, be proximal, so that they could understand and fix, right? Work to fix the solution. They wanted to build communities where people could have these conversations, because this is what we're seeing now. Education is being attacked because, talking about slavery or talking about the history of race in this country is making some folks uncomfortable. And instead of leaning into this discomfort and having the conversations that are needed in order to move past, they're trying to sweep it under the rug. And so one of the prominent results was this desire to have this difficult conversation so that people could move forward. There was some advocacy aspect, there was some teaching, disseminating this information aspect that was also brought and seen as a theme for these answers. So some of the courses that then were developed based on the information that was gathered during the interviews So like I said, there were 4 core courses. So the history of race in America, mass incarceration and beyond, economics of racial inequality, and abolition democracy. And then there are electives that were born from the comments that were gathered during the interviews, but also topic or field specific. One of the things that we know and we realize is that racial injustice is in all fields. It's in healthcare, it's in the law, it's in education, it's in social services, it's in business. And so finding a way to touch people in all the fields so that they can do their part within their sphere of influence was something that was very important to us. And so you'll see some courses in the arts, like Black in America, examining US history through music, right? You'll see some courses in religious studies, right? The religious underpinnings of mass incarceration and gun violence. You'll see some courses in medicine, because so although it's right now we're envisioning it as an undergraduate curriculum, it can be, scaled up. Some of these courses are being taught in as electives in law school. Some of these courses can also be taught as electives in med school. And I had some conversation with first and second year medical students who are really interested in this curriculum. And so some of the goals that we have is, for the students or the participants, because like I said, they're not only college students. And so in the community, it doesn't look like a 15-week course, but it could be some workshops, it could be a book club, etc. So some of the things that we want participants to do is to discuss the history and the importance of narrative change, policy, advocacy, litigation, and social movements. We want them to analyze how and why capitalism, struggle, resistance, social justice, solidarity, and liberation are experienced by people, by communities of color. We want them to examine the disparities in justice. We want them to engage in the community to advocate for change and collaboration. So these are, some of the objectives that led to, the creation of these courses. And some of these courses were already taught by various people in various colleges and universities or as workshops, and they wanted to collaborate and share with us, their material. And so what happens with this curriculum, the material, the syllabi, the readings, the material are all available, so that, because one thing that we know is that people don't necessarily have the time to construct these courses. This is a project that we're on the 3rd year. This has been a 3-year project, and not everybody has that time and resources to create, to design all of these courses. So this is something that we wanted to do and to share, and so people then can use the whole curriculum as is and create a major if they want. They could use it as a minor. They can also just take bits and pieces, certain courses to fit in majors that they already have, or some faculty member wants to teach a course on social justice activism, and all the material is right there for them to use. The next phase of this implementation will be to work closely with community-based organizations to find a way to deliver this information in a way that is already practiced within their organization. So whether they have workshops that are 2-hour workshops twice a week, finding a way to condense this material, a course or two to fit, their population, their needs. So I kind of went into this slide. So the target users are academics, right? So faculty and students, community-based organizations, and people who are currently incarcerated. Those who are participating in higher education and prison programs, but also those who are not in higher education and prison programs. Because we know that not all facilities in New York State, which is a progressive, I'm going to say in quotes, state, we have many higher education and prison programs. inside a lot of the prisons, but some states don't, and I don't we don't want those particular states to penalize people because they don't have a higher education and prison program. Some programs don't allow people with life sentences, for example, to partake in it. Some people only allow students who are within 5 years of release to partake in higher education and prison program. So there's a huge population that is not being serviced, and we would like to be able to have these workshops inside of the prison. So we are now, as we are nearing the end of this project, we're going to have our big launch event in April. So I'll definitely put my email for those of you who want to know more about this. But the website is under construction, and it will be available starting April 10th. What else? So like I said, people will be free to use the entire curriculum or portions of it. Yeah, I think I just mentioned all of these, the next bullet points. And yeah, so questions?
Yeah. Dr. Mack?
Yeah, hello. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for that. It's very exciting.
Let me stop sharing so I can see.
Right. I'm also in New York State, Central New York, right, where the action is. We have way too many prisons still, haven't been shut down. And I've taught in a number of prisons, and I've been routinely removed. You know, at the end of a seminar, I was like, Dr. Nagel, the classroom is no longer available. And I had a feeling it had to do with my abolitionist sensibilities. When they first thought I would come in with psychology, because who knows, you know, that was 20 years ago, what a philosopher does. So they pegged me as psychology, loved me. And I don't know, maybe the word got out what I was doing in those classrooms, right? Empowerment, abolition, you know, political theory, right? So I'm really interested to see how do you sustain your prison education program without being booted by the state. That is so
Yeah,
interesting.
it's a very thin, it's an interesting dance, right, that we have to play, recognizing that, you know, we're going in their house and therefore we have to play by their rules, right? So finessing, I mean, for me, you know, like I said, I'm formerly incarcerated, so I know how to play the game, right? I know who I'm working with. So so first we know there's a lot of relationship building that, you know, needs to take place with the administration, etc., so that you get to a space where they're trusting you, and then understanding how to not break that trust while still delivering the information that you want to deliver, right? And so having you know, books that aren't going to scare off the administration, yet still challenge and have people inside think, right? And so there's what's going on in the book, and there's also then the conversations that we're having inside, right? There's so it is a very, you know, thin line, but and sometimes all they're having these conversations among themselves, right? So it's not necessarily what I'm saying to them, but it's kind of like the questions that that are being posed, and the conversation goes there, right? So it's not, oh, Ms. Hughes said blah 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 blah. No, they had the conversation, and I was just there to listen, right? Or ask, you know, certain questions that so there's so I'm not going in there advocating for abolition, right? But we're having the conversations and understanding, you know, is prison really helping you, right? And I'm teaching in maximum security prisons where some of the guys are there for 30, 40 years, right? One of them is telling me he's going to be inside until he's 109, you know? So it's like, okay, well, let's have this conversation. Is this helping you? What are you learning here that you couldn't have learned? Why did it have to take you to go to prison to go to college? Right. And so these are the kind of conversations that we're having. And, so, knock on wood, I haven't been kicked out yet, but that's the one of the big reasons why I was brought on in that role, because I was already teaching or dealing with higher education in prison. And because I'm, I have the personal experience, there are some books that we know these are going to be looked at twice, right? From the title, but there are some books that have the exact same information, and the title is not as, because they don't read the books. They're not reading the books. They're looking at the pictures on the cover, and they're looking at the title. So one of our collaborators, for example, wrote a book, Becoming Abolitionist, Derica Purnell, and she's got two covers. She's got a cover that's got like a police car on fire, whatever. She knows that's not going to go inside. So craftily, she did another cover that's very, innocuous. I don't even think there's a picture. It's like, blank. And that's the one that's going to go inside the correctional facilities, right? So now, because the word abolitionist is going to raise a red flag, but she knows what she's doing. So if they turn the book around and read the description or whatever, it's going to be very, it's very vanilla, very innocent, and then you go and you have the conversations, right? So it's rough, but it's a whole craft in and of itself. Yeah.
Cool. I'm glad you said that's gonna help. For my class, it's a correspondence class, so like they just get 500 pages full of peer-reviewed articles, and luckily there hasn't been any time when like it's all like Maureen Kaba or Davis or Bukhara prisons or some shit. So like they could easily say no, 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 no to all of it, but it's cheaper them to get a whole 500 pages of like peer-reviewed documents than a $500 book. So that's just how I have to get it in. So, but it's good to know.
Yeah,
that's all it takes.
and like I said, it's relationship, right? So maybe we start with the Intro to Psych 101 and have some of these saucy conversations, and then and it's also one thing I learned: the course title. Because it's like they're gonna look at the big things, right? What is your course titled? What are the title of the books that you're using? After that, they leave you alone for the most part. So, so it's taking a bit of finesse and creativity, but it's funny because you mentioned the packet, because that's something that we're considering doing. The version that's going to go inside the facility would be like like a reader, so that it's not like you say, it's cheaper. You don't have to have bringing all these books in, and it's much more easily shareable, right? Because we know a lot of the education happens among the incarcerated folks, and so that's something that's much more easy to disseminate that way.
Right on. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Dr. Nagel. Does anyone else have any comments or questions or anything, concerns? Do you have any a link or anything we can share, Lizette, or some
Yeah, I can
words?
share my email. And I mean the website is not in existence yet, but it will be rjad.org. But I mean, if you do it now, you're not gonna get anything. But I'll definitely share my email so that you can see. So I'm gonna put it in there for you, Lucas, and then you can put it.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely send me an email, and then I'll add you to our mail list so that you'll get information once the curriculum is out. And since you're in New York, Dr. Nagel, if you want to come down when we have our launch event, we'll be happy to have you.
Sounds good. I'll be in New York in April for my PhD residency, but it'll only be for a weekend, so maybe I can sneak into that lunch too. So
Yes, come on down. It's gonna be on the Wednesday night on the 10th. The 10th, I think, is a Wednesday evening. You know, little cocktails and
yeah,
food, and
sounds
little
good.
panel and reveal. So yeah, come
Right
on down.
on. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, participants and panelists, for participating in this year's awesome Transformative Justice Conference. I am going to end the recording. Stop.